Session 2, titled Vision and Challenges of the UK-US Alliance, will now begin. This session will be moderated by Ms. Paula Hancock from CNN. Ms. Hancock, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, Chairman Chung Won-joon. It's a pleasure to be here, and this is Session 2. This is the Vision and Challenges of the ROK-US Alliance. Now, this morning we've been hearing about the past, we've been reminiscing. This is really going to be looking to the future, looking to what the challenges will be going forward, and how the alliance is going to evolve. Now, we are lucky in the fact that we have somewhat of a blueprint, given that US President Biden has just been here and has met with South Korean President Yoon, and they have told us how they would like this alliance to evolve. So we have something to base this discussion on, and their efforts to expand the alliance. Now, to discuss this, I'm joined by an excellent panel of guests. I will echo what James Kim said this morning. I don't think I've moderated such a high caliber of guests before, so I'm honored to do so. We have an hour and 15 minutes in order to discuss this. So what I'll do, I'll introduce each guest individually, and then they will have some time to give their initial thoughts on the vision and the challenges. So in alphabetical order, first of all, Dr. Bruce Bennett. Dr. Bruce Bennett is an adjunct international defense researcher at the RAND Corporation. He is a well-known expert in Northeast Asian security issues, and I understand has visited this region over 120 times. So Dr. Bennett, if you could give us your initial thoughts.
Absolutely. My pleasure to be here, and thank you to Asan for the opportunity. I took from the summit meeting between President Biden and President Yoon one very important statement. I understand they said solid deterrence against North Korea is more important than anything else. And that's really key. If you look at the history, we haven't had another Korean War since the 50s. We've done away in the last few years with limited attacks. But unfortunately, we are suffering from an extensive series of missile tests. 17 different days when that's occurred this year. You figure it out, that's one every 9 days on average. That's unacceptable, and that needs to be deterred. Kim has been very clever about doing this as well. He started out small, build up, testing us and conditioning us. He thought initially that it would be short-range missile tests, goes to an intermediate-range ballistic missile test, and we don't do very much. And so he eventually goes on, and if we believe what we're hearing, maybe 6 total ICBM tests in the last few weeks. That's amazing. I would have thought we would never have allowed such a thing. So we have to look at how you then deter. I'm struck by the approach that was taken by President Kim Dae-jung in his 1997 inaugural address. He said very quickly, number one, I'm not going to take any North Korean provocations. But number two, I don't want any harm to North Korea, and I'm not going to try to absorb North Korea. And number three, I'm going to do what I can to help North Korea. That balanced approach, it seems to me, is key to dealing with North Korea so we don't get into some kind of escalation contest. We, though, need to have a concept for how we deter provocations, including missile tests. I think the key piece we have missed in all of that is information. We know not long ago that Kim Jong-un said that he considered Korean culture and K-pop in particular a vicious cancer that was undermining the morals of his young people and could cause the regime to collapse like a damp wall. Well, regime collapse is the absolute worst outcome for him. So he's scared of this. And I think that gives us leverage we have not been using. There are various ways we can inject information into the North, and we ought to be talking about some of those, but even just trying to inject into the North USB drives with K-pop and K-dramas on them and so forth, those would circulate widely, and Kim would be very, very angry. So I think we can tell him, if you do another ICBM test, here are some of the things we're going to do. But you know that if you want deterrence, you've got to make an explicit threat, and if he violates that condition, you've got to follow up and take action. Those are the things that our two governments have to be planning together, and I hope we see more of that and we see it announced so that people understand that we really are serious about these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bennett. I'd like to turn now to Dr. Edwin Fulner. Dr. Fulner is the founder of the Heritage Foundation, serving as the Chung Ju-young Fellow of the Foundation, also the chairman of its Asian Studies Center. Now, Dr. Fulner has authored 9 books, and he has held a number of different positions within the government, far too many to mention here. So, Dr. Fulner, your thoughts, please.
Thank you, Paula. It's wonderful to be here again. I think Bruce and I could probably have a good debate about nuclear, the specifics of nuclear deterrence, and here I would call particularly attention to our host, Chung Mung-jun's repeated calls for basically officially renouncing the non-nuclear status of the Korean Peninsula since one side has already done it. Why shouldn't the ROK reinstall, borrow, or bring back counter-nuclear weapons here in terms of being a real alternative to what's going on in the North? When these issues started to come to my attention almost 20 years ago, I remember talking to various experts some of whom are here. My friend John Hamry, I know, will be with us a little bit later by video. And I said, hey, if DPRK goes nuclear, that means the ROK will go nuclear. That means, what about Japan? What about Taiwan? Does China really want all of its neighborhood to become nuclear on the eastern side like it already is on the western side with Russia, Pakistan, India, etc.? And I didn't think that was conceivable, but people seem to have kind of lost sight of that. The second thing, and here I want to pay particular credit to the Biden administration on 2 counts that I think one has not been mentioned yet that I know of, and that is the initiative late last year after the disaster of Afghanistan, of the Afghanistan pullout, of what's become known as AUKUS, the Australia, UK, US coming together inside the Pacific, bringing the United Kingdom back into the Pacific in terms of sea lane communication, sea lane opening, and being a part of a positive interaction. And here, the ramifications of that, it seems to me, are going to be happening later this month when our host government here, the Republic of Korea, actually attends the NATO summit in Spain as a guest of NATO. The notion that the ROK is going to be involved in an actual NATO summit is, to me, not only kind of beyond my normal conceptions of what might happen, but a very, very positive step forward. The other thing I would give the Biden administration specific credit for is a couple of the specific agreements that were signed by Biden and Yoon just 2 weeks ago here. One I would call to your particular attention, and here, as it's something that I've kind of taken up in my senior years, and that is the whole role of nuclear power, where the ROK government and the U.S. have said they are going to work together in terms of expanding the opportunities for nuclear power. This is something very concrete that on a bilateral basis we ought to really be talking about and we ought to be pushing forward on. It's positive, it's not military or necessarily immediately strategic, but it's the kind of thing where we can work together with technology from both sides, with a common desire to come up with green energy, which everyone from Bill Gates to some of my good friends on the right will admit is is a very positive way of looking at green energy. Let's talk about things like that, and let's see how we can make all of that happen. So there are some great opportunities out there, but at the same time, I think we've got to cut through and get back to some of these basics. And one of those basics, final challenge here to my Korean friends. 15 years ago, I remember sitting in a room like this in Seoul, saying that when it comes to dealing with the DPRK, Washington and Seoul have to be that close, but Tokyo has to be right there too. And MJ, I love you like a brother, but you know, the United States suffered certain humiliation from Japan too. It was called Pearl Harbor, for a starter. So, you know, we've got to work with the situation the way it is today. We've got to get Japan, the ROK, and the U.S. as close together as we can. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you, Dr. Fulner. Now, up next, I'd like to travel to Washington, D.C., where we are joined virtually by Dr. John Hamre. Now, Dr. Hamre is President and CEO of CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Before that, he served as the 26th U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense and has also held many positions within the Department of Defense. So, Dr. Hamre, welcome, and if you could give us your initial thoughts, please.
Well, thank you very much. I do apologize that I cannot be with you. I had a recent medical procedure that prevents me from traveling right now, so I do apologize. And I do want to say my sincere thanks to MJ Chung and to the Asan Institute for organizing this very important conference. And I'm really grateful that I was included. The theme of this particular session is the vision and challenges of the ROK-US alliance. So I want to say one thing about vision and one thing about challenge. First, the vision. And I've said this, I think with every Korean audience in the last 10 years. My vision is that Korea starts thinking of itself as a bigger country. By that I don't mean unification. I'm all for that. Korea is a hugely successful country. There's no other country over the last 70 years that has so profoundly evolved itself and made itself a major power. But Koreans spend too much time thinking of themselves as a vulnerable nation, a nation on the edge of the international system, a country that's falling behind. Korea is a great and successful country. It needs to have a larger vision for its own role in the world. And I'm hearing that now emerging, and I'm very grateful for it. I think that this understandable short-sightedness was caused by the fact that only 30 miles away you've got a pathological opponent. But Korea is strong enough now to have bigger vision for itself and a larger role in the international system. And I would hope that that would be part of this future. Now let me just shift very briefly to talk about challenge. And forgive me for being very blunt about this, but I think the greatest challenge between us is needing to restore the credibility of America's pledge of extended deterrence. I think that has become questioned in recent years. And frankly, I mean, I've heard it from Korean friends and Japanese friends. The war in Ukraine right now is undermining our image of a credible partner. We're prepared to give weapons to Ukraine, but we're trying to avoid any real conflict with Russia for good reasons. I understand that. But to American allies around the world, that raises a question about our credibility with our pledge of extended deterrence. And we've now been, 10, 12 years with trying to deflect North Korea from their campaign. We've not been successful. I don't think we should give up on that. And I agree with my colleagues here. This ought to be our focus. But we're going to have to put some effort into rebuilding the credibility of America's pledge to its allies about our creditworthiness as a nuclear partner. So I think that's the challenge in front of us. So let me stop there, and I really look forward to hearing all my other colleagues on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hamry. Next, I would like to turn to Ms. Karen Elliott House. Ms. House is Senior Fellow at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government, and also Chair of the Board of the RAND Corporation. And she's also the former Senior Vice President of Dow Jones and Company and publisher of the Wall Street Journal. So, Ms. House, if you could give your initial thoughts, please.
Thank you. In the interest of 100% accuracy, I'm the immediate past chair. I don't want Bruce to think I'm promoting myself as chairman when I retired a year ago. So,
We still love you.
oh, thank you, Bruce. I just wanted to really focus on the credibility issue, as I did a little bit at lunch. I think whether it's communicating information to the North about K-pop or putting American tactical nuclear weapons back into Seoul, into Korea, that there has to be something that the U.S. and South Korea do that indicates this sort of long, it wasn't just the narcissistic Trump-Kim period, it was longer than that, I think, when it has been clear that North Korea does not intend to denuclearize. And so the U.S., South Korea, I think, have to come up with something far more credible and concrete that says to both China and North Korea, we're no longer going to be kind of smiling dupes. we're going to respond in some way. And like Ed, I thought perhaps that at this Biden-Yoon summit, since President Yoon had said he was going to take a tougher stance, that we might get some result like reinstituting tactical nuclear weapons into South Korea, but it didn't happen. So I have no idea how Pyongyang looks at things, but I would think that they are waiting also to see where's the beef, in the famous American political phrase from the two presidents' meetings here. What is actually going to change beyond rhetoric? I'm a faithful follower of Asan publications, and the most recent one had something I found very interesting because I share the concern about South Korea and Japan and the need to be a tight triumvirate there. That a poll that said that 83% of South Koreans favor a strong Japan, South Korea, U.S. alliance. I hope that is statistically accurate. And the other thing in that poll that struck me was 70%, according to the poll, of Koreans support the development of indigenous South Korean nuclear weapons. I personally think that would be a good idea and is not beyond the capability of South Korea, clearly. But my point, and I will stop, is that it is necessary to go far beyond words and to get into real detailed understanding between the two countries of how we will confront, not in a militaristic way, but in a credibility, a strong credibility, how we intend to confront all of these tests that the North Koreans are doing. Clearly, the Chinese and the North Koreans are trying to create a new normal. You know, it's so normal that they do tests, so what? You know, and that the Chinese overfly Taiwan. It just happens all the time, and then one day they don't overfly, they attack. So I think we can't get used to we can't accept that it's just okay to do nuclear tests and it's okay to overfly Taiwan. We have to have some greater cohesion and concrete understanding about what we're going to do, or we're going to continue to get inched into a new reality we don't want to be in. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. House. Thank you. Next, I'd like to turn to General Jung Sun-jo. General Jung is the president of the Korea-US Alliance Foundation. He was also the 37th chairman of the ROC Joint Chiefs of Staff, retiring from active duty in 2013 after 42 years of service. So, General Chung, your thoughts, please.
Thank you. First, thank you very much to Asan to have this kind of good, excellent opportunity to see the old friends in person and through the net, and to have the chance to express my opinion about the alliance issues. I understand this session is focused on the vision of the alliance. It is a kind of a long-term concept. In 1953, the alliance pursued the capability to deter the attack of North Korea and the expansion of Soviet communism. Now, the focuses of the alliance moved to countering China's ambition to have regional hegemony, and became more comprehensive and more global. When we say comprehensive, I don't mean we may have less emphasis on security issue or military issues. In the military perspective, the alliance should focus on the very serious and imminent military threat of North Korea, and also how to keep the alliance to counter the threats. There are some critical agenda like denuclearization of North Korea, deterrence of North Korean nuclear weapon, and management of pending issues, and the management of the alliance. First, the denuclearization of North Korea. I don't believe North Korea may voluntarily give up its nuclear program. Theoretically, there can be two cases in which North Korea may give up its nuclear ambition. First one is when nuclear capability is no longer helpful to the sustainment of Kim regime because of intolerable sanctions. Second is when North Korea cannot use its nuclear capability because of effective deterrence. Intolerable sanctions are not easy for the international community, as North Korea is accustomed to insufficiencies, and some members like China or Russia are not so cooperative. We need to put efforts to educate democratic values to the people of North Korea, even though it takes a long time. Second, the deterrence. In military perspective, deterrence is more important. The alliance should have stronger capability and more decisive commitment. The extended deterrence should not stay at the declaration level. The joint statement after the summit talks in May has good guidance for further involvement. I recommend to develop the extended deterrence to upland level. Once operational plan is completed, the alliance can conduct exercises including TTX, CPX, or FTX. Northeast Asian version of nuclear planning group and nuclear sharing can be the good options to strengthen the capability and show the decisive commitment of extended deterrence. Korea also needs to have stronger conventional precise strike capability and advanced nuclear-related capabilities. Third, the management of pending issues. Excuse me. We need to decide the wartime Afghan transition with careful evaluation of conditions. I recommend to operate the civilian non-government evaluation team to have more objective evaluation. The alliance needs to enlarge the combined exercises. I hope to see the UFL or UFG level, that scaled CPX, and team spirit scaled FTX again. Host nation support is very important for the stable stationing of USFK. Korean government should guarantee the live fire exercise for Apache helicopters and normal operation of THAAD battery. The military cooperation with Japan is critically important to ROK and US alliance. ROK military needs to resume the joint training and human exchange program with Japanese self-defense forces. Fourth and finally, management of alliance. Healthy alliance needs the efforts to maintain it. Fortunately, both countries have two great presidents who understand the value and importance of the alliance very well. I expect the government officials and military leaders will develop good policies to strengthen the alliance. But they are not enough. Both governments should have great efforts to let the people understand the value and importance of the alliance. It is also very important the civilian sides have more contacts with each other. In that sense, the Asan Symposium today has great meaning. Thank you.
Thank you, General Chung. Thank you for those comments. Next, I would like to turn to National Assemblyman Kim Byung-ju, also a retired general and now a current lawmaker. I'm sure you've been very busy the past couple of days. Also a member of the National Defense Committee. Assemblyman Kim retired from active duty in 2018 after 39 years of active duty in the ROK Army. Assemblyman Kim, your comments, please.
Yeah, good afternoon. I am Kim Byung-ju, National Assemblyman. I will give a speech in Korea now. 예, 여러분 반갑습니다. 오늘 심포지엄은 아주 의미가 있다고 봅니다. 한미동맹의 과거와 미래를 생각해보는 아주 좋은 시간의 심포지엄입니다. 이런 심포지엄 기회를 갖게 해주신 우리 분들께 감사드립니다. 한미동맹은 그동안 6.25 전쟁 이후에 지속적으로 강화되어 왔고 이를 기반으로 우리 대한민국은 민주화와 산업화를 이루어냈습니다. 현재는 세계 10위권의 선진국 투입에 들어간 정도로 우리가 발전된 나라를 이루었습니다. 이러한 한미동맹은 작년 문재인 정부 대통령과 바이든 대통령이 작년 5월에 바이든 정부 들어와서 한미 정상회담을 했었는데 그때부터 이제 폭이 넓어지고 깊어졌습니다. 그동안은 군사동맹 위주로 이렇게 되어 오던 것이 경제 분야로 많이 확대가 됐죠. 작년에 알다시피 배터리 분야라든가 또는 반도체 분야 또 AI, 5G, 6G 협력을 서로 하는 걸로 협력을 했었죠. 그리고 코로나와 관련해서 백신 협력까지 이끌어내서 의료 분야까지 확대됐습니다. 그리고 우리 한반도에서 이루어지던 한미 동맹이 폭이 넓어져서 우주 분야까지 작년에는 확대됐습니다. 우주 탐사에 대한 공동으로 탐사하기 위한 아르테미스 협정을 한다든가, 또 한국형 GPS, KPS를 만드는 사업에 미국이 같이 동참을 해서 도와주고 협력하겠다라고 해서 엄청나게 많이 폭이 확대됐습니다. 이를 기초로 지난 몇 주 전에 윤석열 대통령과 바이든 대통령은 한미 정상을 했고, 작년에 했던 이러한 것들을 계속 이어가겠고 하는 재정립을 공고함을 하긴 하면서, 실제 바이든 대통령도 작년 이후에 한미 동맹이 새로운 장을 열었다. 글로벌 전략 파트너, 글로벌 전략 동맹으로 가고 있다라는 것을 얘기했었죠. 이러한 한미 동맹은 이제 미래에 많은 과제를 안고 있다고 봅니다. 저는 4가지 측면에서 얘기하고자 합니다. 일단 가장 중요한 것은 북한을 비핵화시키는 문제와 평화체제를 만들어가는 문제라고 봅니다. 이를 해결하기 위해서 최근에는 문재인 대통령과 트럼프 대통령이 남북 정상회담이나 북미 정상회담 등 여러 가지 노력을 기울여서 많은 진척을 이루었지만은, 사실은 하노이 정상회담에서 노딜로 감으로써 다시 가시적인 성과를 못 내는 것이 가장 안타까운 지점이었습니다. 그리고 다시 경색 국면으로 갔었는데, 지금 윤석열 정부와 바이든 정부에서는 이것을 다시 재개를 해야 된다고 봅니다. 여러 가지 형태의 행동을 해야 되겠죠. 백신 협력이라든가 인도적 지원부터 하든지 여러 가지를 해서 어떻게든 물꼬를 터면서 비핵화와 평화 체제를 만들어가는 작업을 해야 되는 것이 한미 동맹의 가장 큰 1번 가업이라고 봅니다. 2번째 가업은 북한의 핵 미사일은 우리에게 실체적 위협으로 다가오고 있습니다. 그래서 우리의 한미 동맹의 힘을 더 강화시키는 것이죠. 그 방법은 저는 2가지를 얘기하고 싶습니다. 하나는 확장 억제 정책을 한미는 써왔습니다. 그렇지만은 그 구체화 정도가 사실은 좀 미약하죠. 개념적으로만 돼 있기 때문에, 개념적으로만 돼 있다 보니까 우리 한국 국민들은 의구심을 갖고 있습니다. 과연 확장 억제 정책이 제대로 유사시에 발현이 될 것인가에 대한 의구심이죠. 그래서 확장 억제 정책에 대한 좀 더 구체적인 계획을 발전시키고, 필요하다면은 이런 것들이 작전 계획에까지 반영이 되는 노력이 필요합니다. 또 하나는 지금 핵 추진 잠수함이 한국은 필요합니다. 핵 추진 잠수함에 필요한데 미국의 협조와 협력 없이는 이루기가 좀 어렵습니다. 그래서 이러한 미국의 협력이 좀 필요하다고 봅니다. 3번째는 한미 동맹은 좀 더 군사 동맹에서 계속 분야를 확대해 가야 되겠죠. 그동안 군사 동맹에 머물러 있던 것을 가치 동맹, 경제 동맹, 문화 동맹, 특히 기술 동맹으로 이어져야 된다고 봅니다. 분야가 또 확대할 뿐만 아니라 지역도 확대해야 되는 것이죠. 한반도의 평화와 안정에 머물지 않고 동북아의 안정, 세계 평화를 향해서 나아가야 된다고 생각을 합니다. 4번째로는 저는 늘 오랫동안 한미동맹 분야를 근무하면서 느꼈던 것이, 한미동맹이 앞으로 지속 발전하기 위해서는 건강한 동맹이 되어야 된다는 것입니다. 건강한 동맹이란 것은 서로 주고받는 것이죠. 일방적으로 준다든가 일방적인 강요를 하는 것이 아니라 서로의 다름을 이해하고 또 협력해가는 그러한 것입니다. 이러한 건강한 동맹으로 가야 계속 발전을 합니다. 대표적으로 작년에 문재인 대통령과 바이든 대통령이 한미 미사일 지침을 해제했습니다. 한미 미사일 지침을 해제함으로써 사실 이것은 한미 간의 완전한 신뢰의 표상이 되기도 합니다. 그래서 한국의 는 미사일 주권, 무인기 주권, 우주 주권을 얻게 됨으로써 미국에 대한 신뢰뿐만 아니라 한국의 군사력과 우주 시대를 열 수 있는 길을 여는 것이죠. 특히 이런 불균형한 분야는 많이 있습니다. 예를 들면 무기 수출입 분야죠. 최근 5년 동안 한국의 무기는 미국에 수출을 한 것이 없습니다. 그렇지만은 미국의 무기가 한국에 수출된 것은 많죠. 미국은 한국이 무기 수출의 4대 국가 중에 하나입니다. 그러니까 앞으로 이런 것들은 수출입을 보다 좀 더 강화를 하고 하면서도 기술에 대한 공유가 필요하다고 봅니다. 최근 정상회담에서도 얘기했듯이 한미 상호 국방 물자 협력 이런 것들을 추진하고 있는 건데 이런 것들이 실제 한국과 미국의 사항에 맞게 협력이 잘 돼서 이런 것들도 균형점을 찾아가는 이런 노력이 필요하다고 생각합니다. 이러한 노력을 기울인다면 한미동맹은 미래에도 지속적으로 발전하고 강화되리라고 봅니다. 저는 국회의원으로서 2년 전부터 국회에 들어와서 한미동맹 노력을 강화해 왔습니다. 예를 들면 1년 반 전에는 한미동맹을 강화하는 차원에서 한미동맹 지지 결의안을 제가 대표 발의하고 많은 국회의원들의 공동 발의를 이끌어내서 137분이 공동 발의를 했고 본회의를 통과를 했습니다. 국회에서도 한미동맹을 지지한다는 것을 바이든 정부 막 들어설 때 결의를 했던 것이죠. 앞으로도 국회 차원에서 한미동맹을 지지하고 또 할 수 있도록 노력하겠습니다. 감사합니다. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Assemblyman Kim. Thank you for those thoughts. And then I would like to turn to Ambassador Shim Yun-jo. Ambassador Shim is a distinguished professor at the Graduate School of Politics and Leadership at Korean University here in Seoul. The ambassador is also a career diplomat, serving as ambassador to Austria and before that as ambassador to Portugal. Ambassador Shim, your initial thoughts, please.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, for kind introduction. I would also like to express my gratitude to Dr. Jung and Asan Institute for hosting this valuable symposium at an opportune time. The Global Comprehensive Strategic Alliance between the ROC and the US has transformed the nature of the alliance to a global partnership with shared values in almost every field, including not only security and economy, but also science and technology and space as well. It has also allowed us to envision the future of South Korea's enhanced national power and corresponding responsibility to it as a global pivotal state. Given the time constraint, however, I would rather focus on the challenges lying ahead. I would like to touch upon 4 challenges. First, the most notable challenge will come from China. South Korea has adopted strategic ambiguity and a policy of security with the US and economy with China, what you call 안미경중 in Korean. But it has invited backlash from both the US and China. The US came to harbor doubt that South Korea might lean to the Chinese side, while China came to regard Korea as a weak link in the ROC US-Japan trilateral solidarity. Under these circumstances, South Korea made a strategic error by committing the so-called 3 no's to China. In the era of US-China confrontation, when economic security has become a major topic, the concept of 안미경중 is no longer valid. Korea's expectation of China exerting its influence over North Korea in resolving the nuclear issue is also in decline. Now is the time for South Korea to rebuild its relationship with China on the basis of equality and mutual respect. The most important thing for Korea is to pursue a consistent and principled diplomacy based on universal values such as freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. In pursuit of consistency, we might have to face conflicts and painful situations. But in the long run, enhancing the predictability of our foreign policy and rebuilding confidence as a result will be conducive to our national interest. At the same time, South Korea must diversify its economic network in order to decrease economic dependence on China. The second challenge is North Korea. In the ROC-US joint statement in May, the 2 leaders made it clear that the US would use nuclear weapons against North Korea's nuclear attack. It was meaningful to reinforce the United States' nuclear commitment as it sent a strong message to the North. But we have to take note of North Korea's latest move to develop nuclear tactical weapons, revealing its intent to launch a preemptive strike against South Korea. In order to address such nuclear threat, I believe close consultations between the ROC and the US should be held at an early date on the issue of nuclear balance on the Korean Peninsula. Some panels pointed out that issue, as well as the issue of South Korea's right for uranium enrichment and reprocessing by revising the ROC-US Nuclear Cooperation Agreement. The third challenge is Japan. As Ms. Karen House said, it's Korea's own concern, but I think it's the common concern between us. The ROC-US-Japan trilateral cooperation is essential for the US Indo-Pacific strategy, along with IPF and Quad. And the restoration of relations between Korea and Japan is a prerequisite to the full-fledged trilateral cooperation through which the ROC-US alliance will be further strengthened. But past history issues which hinder the improvement of Korea-Japan relations are so complicated that it is quite difficult to resolve them in a short period of time. Therefore, it is desirable for the two countries to pursue strategic cooperation at this stage while taking necessary steps to avoid aggravation of relations. Then, if the two leaders meet and reach an agreement on a future-oriented cooperation framework, as in the Kim Dae-jung-Obuchi Declaration in 1998, diplomatic solutions to historical issues could be found according to the framework. Last but not least, another challenge lies in the issue of trust. Trust between Korea and the US. The success of the recent summit was largely dependent on the trust between the two countries. The US seemed to trust President Yoon since he underscored the importance of alliance during the election campaign and clarified his conviction of freedom at the inaugural speech. Trust is the key to a robust alliance. In order to keep strengthening mutual trust, it is critical for the two countries to faithfully implement all the agreed projects. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador Shin, and thank you all for your comments. There's plenty for us to talk about here, a number of different threads that we could follow, and of course North Korea is a common thread through everybody's comments, but I am very aware there is a session later this afternoon specifically for North Korea. So I wonder if we could start with China. Looking at the expanded alliance that both President Biden and President Yoon have spoken about. Dr. Hamre, if I could start with you. Previous administrations here in South Korea have always tried to balance strengthening the alliance with not rocking the boat too much in the neighborhood. But President Yoon seems happy to push forward in a far more open and direct way. Do you think there is a concern of repercussions? Do you think that's something we should even be thinking about? Do we need to balance that with strengthening the alliance?
No, I'm not personally concerned about President Yoon's posture on approaching China. I think I've never been concerned about Korea's view about China. Sometimes I think that we've been a little too optimistic about China and its intentions, its willingness to really bring discipline to North Korea. I think President Yoon has framed it in a way that Americans are comfortable with. So I don't see a big problem, honestly.
Mm. And Dr. Bennett, with the increase and expansion of this alliance, do you see any challenges in an increasingly authoritarian neighborhood?
Well, I think even many of the Koreans are now increasingly concerned talking about the nuclear issue with regard to who's the bigger threat, North Korea's nuclear weapons or China's nuclear weapons. I think there is reason to believe that we should be stepping down the steps towards preparing Korea for the future that you're talking about of having nuclear weapons. But I think that path is not one that ends tomorrow. I think that's one that takes some time. You may disagree, but I think we've got to generate the expertise so that we have an ability to work as allies and still coordinate. Dealing with China, China has declared they want to be the world hegemon by 2049. Well, if they want to be the world hegemon by then, they're going to want to be the regional hegemon by 2030 or 2035, so they can move beyond. They're going to have trouble with North Korea in that regard, and I think South Korea is going to be very concerned. You know, look at the THAAD experience. Over $50 billion worth of cost to South Korea, according to what I've seen, $7 billion to Lotte. That's huge cost that China used. China wasn't just sitting around. They've for decades been preparing to establish a level of trade with South Korea where they could then use that to influence things. And I think we have to recognize that there's got to be some real thinking about how to deal with that leverage.
Dr. Fulner.
No. Bruce, I'm glad you said that because as I heard our fellow panelists here, I frankly was a little surprised, particularly from some of my Korean colleagues on the panel, to hear their willingness to at least discuss the reintroduction of nuclear weapons in the ROK. And the theme of this conference is, of course, to look ahead, and that doesn't mean just looking ahead 3 or 6 months or one presidential term, but looking ahead strategically. So I'm with you, you know, that's what we have to be doing as we look ahead and look at what the timeline might well be. So thank you for that. That clarification and reinforcement, I think.
Now, I would just repeat, I think it's incredibly important for the governments in both countries to prepare their publics and their adversaries, i.e. China, so that there's clarity on what's going to happen, because to be progressing with us thinking one thing and Korea thinking another is not a position either of us should want to be in. So if the price of economic retaliation by China is so high that South Korea prefers to capitulate, it's better we all find that out sooner rather than later.
Or that we be prepared to assist Korea
Yes, exactly.
to offset that penalty.
That cost. Yeah.
But I think that's the most important thing, looking at what are the pressures on South Korea and how do you alleviate those pressures, and what are the pressures the Chinese can bring to bear, and how do you try to mitigate those?
And off the back of mentioning once again, you know, the possible reintroduction of nuclear weapons in South Korea, General Chung, if I could address this to you. I mean, obviously we've heard over the past couple of weeks more from both presidents that the joint military drills will be expanded, or at least they will discuss that. I mean, that is likely to provoke some kind of a response, as we know from Pyongyang, for example. But to go that step further and to consider the reintroduction of nuclear weapons, or bringing strategic, tactical nuclear weapons back to the peninsula.
Are you talking to me?
Sorry, for General Chung.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think this is a good idea? Would this provoke an arms race?
좋은 아이디어인지는 잘 모르겠지만 좋은 질문입니다. 우선 그 훈련을 확대하고 하는 그런 문제는 제가 제 발표에서도 말씀을 드렸습니다마는 지금까지 최근 몇 년간 과거에 우리가 해오던 군사 훈련이 많이 약화되었습니다. 특히 한미연합 훈련이 그것이 CPX이건 또 실제로 병력과 장비를 기동하는 FTX이건 간에 그 규모가 많이 줄었습니다. 여기 있는 분들 대부분이 기억하시기를 우리 군, 관, 민이 모두 참여한 그 을지 포커스 렌스, 을지 프리덤 가디언 이러한 연습들을 기억하실 것이고 봄에 3월 말 4월 초에 그 팀 스피릿이라고 하는 대규모 기동 훈련들을 기억하실 것입니다. 이제 그러한 것들이 규모가 줄어들고 이렇게 하면서 사실은 한미 동맹의 이 레이디네스가 많이 약화된 그런 측면이 있습니다. 그래서 지금은 그것을 더 이상 늦출 때가 아니고 그러한 그 대규모의 연합 훈련을 보다 더 자주, 보다 더 실전적으로 해야 될 그러한 시기라고 생각을 합니다. 그 다음에 그 한국의 핵무장론에 대해서는 이것은 이제 보는 분들마다 다 생각이 다르고 그리고 제가 한국 정부의 입장을 대변할 수 있는 그런 입장은 아니기 때문에 제 개인적인 의견을 말씀을 드린다면 저는 우선 이 북한의 핵무기를 억제해야 된다라고 하는 그 명제가 너무나 큰 것이기 때문에 북한의 핵무장을 억제하기 위해서 우리가 할 수 있는 일은 다 해야 된다. 그래서 제가 그 제 발표 중에 말씀드린 중에서도 예를 들어서 뭐 뉴클리어 쉐어링이라든가 또는 동아시아판 뉴클리어 플래닝 그룹이라든가 그런 걸 말씀을 드렸습니다만은 지금 언급하신 전술 핵무기의 한국 재배치 이것도 우리가 신중히 고려할 수 있는 옵션이라고 생각을 합니다. 다만 그것이 북한의 핵 무장을 공식화하고 그 어떤 명분을 주는 방향으로 되어서는 안 될 것이고 어디까지나 이것은 북한의 핵무장을 억제하는 방향으로 되어야 되기 때문에 이러한 그 전술 핵무기의 재배치라든가 그러한 것도 지금 당장 그것이 이루어지진 않더라도 한미 동맹이 필요시에 채택할 수 있는 옵션으로 항상 가지고 있어야 된다라고 저는 그렇게 생각을 합니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you, General Chung. Dr. Hamry, if I could bring you in on this thread, the possibility of introducing tactical nuclear weapons, the possibility of sparking an arms race. I mean, what would your thoughts on this be?
Well, first, I think we've got to say that extended deterrence, first and foremost, is about the credibility of our conventional defenses. You need to fight like hell to make your nuclear threat credible. And so I think the reason that we need to restart the joint training is to revalidate. As a matter of fact, joint training is the best thing we can do to lower the threat of nuclear exchange because it shows we're willing to defend Korea with conventional forces, and American troops on the ground is the foundation of extended deterrence. Now, how we think about making visible and credible America's extended deterrence, I think that's a big question. I have my own personal views that I do think it's going to take more than just flying a B-2, or a B-52 around the peninsula. I think we're going to have to do something far more tangible than that. But I also know it's a very sensitive issue within Korea, and it has to be something that we come together and decide jointly.
Thank you.
Madam Moderator.
Yes, please. Yes.
Well, concerning the issue of reintroduction of tactical nuclear weapons to South Korea, I'd like to point out, mainly three issues. First one is the nature of North Korea's nuclear issue. We have witnessed momentum of change of its nature. First one was in 2017, when North Korea proclaimed the accomplishment of nuclear capabilities. So at that time, they launched so-called ICBM. Whether it had the final, technology of re-entry into the surface, but anyway, they announced it, and it has become the direct military threat to the mainland of the US. So it changed the nature. And second one was maybe this year. The Kim Jong-un clearly said that they would deploy tactical nuclear weapons and they will use it targeting South Korea. So it changed again the nature. In the past, they said, many people in South Korea also said, North Korea would not launch any nuclear weapon to its own people, South Korea, I mean. But it has changed. So we need to reconsider the issue of reintroduction of nuclear arms into South Korea. That's the first thing. And the second thing is the concern of China. Well, they are worried about so-called nuclear domino, as Dr. Fuller pointed out. And I think also there is concern of the US, concerning the proliferation of the nuclear, arms. But in order to address this, concern, I think we can make some conditions on the reintroduction of the tactical weapons. That is, when North Korea denuclearize, well, South Korea will also denuclearize. Then we can have the same condition. Third is, if we fail to decrease North Korea's nuclear ambition, discourage nuclear ambition, then we have to take some measures not to let North Korea to use it. That is, upgrade our nuclear capabilities. So if we take a balance, on the nuclear, capabilities between South and North, then North Korea cannot use it because of the so-called mutually assured destruction. So in that case, only in that case, the North will find out any kind of dialogue between South and North, or between the US and North Korea. So that is the very effective way to encourage, to invite North Korea to the dialogue table. That's my personal opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Shim. I have one more question. I would like to open it up to the floor after this if anybody has questions. Moving out of the region, looking at Ukraine, looking at the many lessons that many countries will be taking from what has happened in Ukraine and from the American response, from the alliance in supporting Ukraine as well. If you bring that in line with President Yoon saying that he wants a global pivotal state, I wonder if I could start with you, Assemblyman Kim, as you've seen both the military side and now the political side as well. What are the implications for the alliance when you look at what's happening in Ukraine at the moment and the international response?
네, 우크라이나의 전쟁이 지금 한창이고 있죠. 우크라이나 전쟁에 대한 우리 정부가 문재인 정부든 윤석열 정부든 우리 정부에서는 일단 러시아의 침공에 대한 규탄, 이것은 그 주권 국가에 대한 침공에 대한 규탄이 첫 번째 지금 하고 있습니다. 그리고 우크라이나에 대해서 인도적인 지원과 비군사 분야, 예를 들어서 전투복이라든가 헬멧이라든가 이런 지원을 지금 하고 있는데 한 4천만 불 정도 현재 지원을 하고 있죠. 그리고 이제 국제사회와 같이 전반적인 것들을 계획을 같이 하고 있습니다. 거기에 추가해서 러시아의 경제 제재를 같이 동참을 해서 하고요. 2014년도에 크림반도를 러시아가 점령했을 때 경제 제재는 우리가 선택적 경제 제재에 동참했는데 이번에는 국제사회와 똑같이 현재 경제 제재에 동참을 하고 있는 사항입니다. 그런 사항이고 우크라이나에 대해서는 이제 두 가지 측면이죠. 그런 걸 하면서 우리도 반면 교사해야 되는 지점이 있는 것이죠. 러시아의 여러 가지 그 확장에 대한 그런 우려를 우리는 교훈으로 삼아야 될 것이고, 또 러시아에서 일어나고 있는 전쟁의 형태를 우리 군에서는 또 잘 교훈으로 삼아야 될 거라고 봅니다. 그러면서 그 접근은 좀 더 신중히 국익 차원에서 해야 되지 않나 하는 생각을 합니다. 특히 예를 든다면은 아마 군사 무기 지원이라든가 이런 것들에 대해서는 아마 우리가 국익 차원에서 좀 신중히 접근을 해야 된다는 것이 저의 개인적인 의견입니다. 예.
Thank you. Dr. Bennett, I mean, what would you say that Pyongyang is taking away from this, looking at what's happening?
Well, I think Pyongyang is trying several different angles. They've been escalating their missile tests. They're preparing, apparently, to escalate to nuclear test. Who knows where they go beyond that? Kim faces significant instability internally from everything we can see, from COVID to famine to dilapidated industry, purges that he's carrying out. I don't think he's going to wake up someday and say, boy, great day to go south. But I think he may wake up someday and say, my military is about to rebel against me. I've got no choice but to order them south or they're going to come north. And I think if we look at it in that context, we've got to be better prepared than I think we have thought about. We've kind of assumed that North wouldn't use nuclear weapons. I think North Korea isn't going to invade South Korea conventionally. Doesn't make any sense. They know they'd lose. So if they use nuclear weapons from the beginning, how well prepared are we? And I think we've got to be prepared to deal with that. In preparing to deal with that, we can then message to the North that you can try this, but if you do, we're going to be ready for you. And that's part of deterrence, is our ability to frustrate the adversary from doing what he might want to do. So I think at this point in time, we need to be looking at how we strengthen our own capabilities to withstand him, because he is paranoid from what we can tell. He may decide at some point in time that he's in trouble and he's got to take military action as a diversion. And we can't predict when that's going to be, so we ought to be prepared.
May I answer kind of a different question that I don't think has been kind of lost in the last two rounds, Paula? I haven't heard Japan mentioned, and gosh, it seems to me when we're talking about enhanced joint operations, joint training, it has to be all three together. And I don't think there'll be any disagreement up here, but we have to keep that very forefront of thinking about the region, because it's, frankly, it's much more credible whether you're talking about Pyongyang or whether you're talking about Beijing, if all three of us are together and doing the kinds of things together that we should be doing.
Yeah, very good point. And I've heard many saying that the atmosphere is better now than it has been for many years for trying to make that happen. Would you agree with that?
It's something that's been a challenge for a long time. But again, we're thinking strategically into the out years, so let's take the baby steps to get us where we should be going.
Were there any questions from the floor? Yes. There's a microphone coming down for you now, I think. If you could just say your name before, thanks.
Thank you very much. My name is Pekka Metsä, and I'm the Finnish ambassador here in Korea. I'm thrilled to listen to this discussion here. Of course, in my country, we are now concentrating very strongly how to build up stronger alliances. That's the name of the game every day when I talk with my government. So very good ideas here coming up. I would just like to make a couple of comments from the European side. First of all, the reference on the building up the dependency on trade. I think that's exactly what Europe is now dealing with. So now you, Mr. Bennett, you said that it's time now to start thinking about that. That's the lesson from Europe, as you know, that how long it's going to take now with the Russia thing. And then also, that Mrs. Hancock, you took the the pivotal word from my mouth, because I have been thinking of what that really means in terms of the regional security, for example, especially in the case of South Korea now, when it's so much discussed about. So what would you like to have in this basket that Korea will become pivotal here, especially regionally? That's what I would like to tell to my government also. And to Mr. Fuller, there's another country that wants to go to Madrid at the end of June with some progress. I also see here similarities with my countries. Look at the securing, strengthening the alliances together with South Korea. So I would like you to maybe elaborate a little bit your enthusiasm that also Koreans will be there at the end of June in Madrid. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Would anyone like to respond?
You going first? You want?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Let me just say, Mr. Ambassador, thank you for what your government is doing too, in terms of applying for NATO membership and facing up to the reality that both the United States and all of our European friends are facing. I commend you, I congratulate you, I thank you, both you and, of course, our good friends in Sweden as well. Where, in terms of how to make this more practical, I think the notion that the President of the Republic of Korea is going to be in Spain with NATO, that the Polish defense minister was here in Korea this last week talking to Korean potential suppliers of military hardware. I believe in the past, Finland, in fact, has bought some hardware from Korean suppliers. And I think that's good, that both to integrate the Pacific with as much of Europe as possible and not just think about the Pacific as kind of being this American concern. So thank you for what you said, and I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Yes.
Thank you, moderator. My name is Jong-Hong Kim. My area is rather trade and economy, but as an ordinary citizen of Korea, I'm pretty much concerned with the security of my country and the security of my life and my family. Well, when we discuss about defense alliance, then the foremost potential risk, of course, that's from North Korea. And North Korean watchers here at home, in US, and even elsewhere abroad, usually talk about missile testing, missile shooting, and nuclear buildup by North Korea. But let me take up another very outrageous and outright provocative actions taken by North Korea less than 2 years ago. That was the destruction of liaison office in Kaesong area. And that building was built by our budget money. And that was less than 2 years ago. I'm going to ask your assessment, number one, to Dr. Bruce Bennett, if you don't mind. What is your assessment about the action, the provocation of North Korea, number one? Number two, what is your assessment, the non-action of then government, I mean Moon administration? And for this later part, let me ask that question on General Kim, who is now congressman, and his party is the government party at that time. So I think he has, of course, a view on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have to get used to the fact that North Korea is testing us constantly. They're testing us and they're conditioning us. If we can accept the destruction of a building in the Kaesong area, well, what about some artillery fire into South Korea? Is that the next step? And the point is, they will test us, they will see what we're prepared to respond. They're not necessarily planning on tomorrow in terms of where they're going to next escalate, but they are working on how they gain leverage. What are they looking for? It seems to me that what they're looking for is to break the U.S.-ROC alliance. They're going to look for any kind of frictions they can to work against our alliance. They have over the last few years, and shamefully, I think, they are excellent at propaganda, and we don't do very well with our counter-propaganda, our information operations. We need to be doing better to show that we really are allies, we really are working closely together. And if Korea experiences China putting economic warfare on South Korea because of THAAD, the U.S. ought to be there with economic help to help those people being affected. So I think we've got to build the alliance.
Here, here.
And Assemblyman Kim, also directed to you, is there something you'd like to add?
네, 그 북한은 우리가 상상을 초월하는 도발을 지금까지 70년 동안 지속적으로 해왔죠, 사실은. 거기에 따라서 우리가 그 진보 보수 정부 할 것 없이 대응은 하되 대응의 수위를 어떻게 하느냐는 그때그때 상황에 따라서 수위를 조절해 왔다고 저는 생각을 합니다. 2년 전에 판문점 연락사무소 폭파도 우리가 상식적으로 생각하지 못한 그야말로 뭐라고 할까 아주 무례하고 도발이었죠. 그리고 그 예산을 말씀하신 대로 건물은 우리 예산으로 지은 것인데 그래서 거기에 대한 대응을 하지 않은 것은 아니고 그때 그 당시는 국방위를 열어서 북한에 대한 강한 규탄과 유감 표시도 하고 대통령이나 청와대에서도 그런 대응은 한 걸로 제가 기억을 하고요. 그렇지만 그것을 군사적으로 거기에 맞는 상응하는 대응을 해야 될 것이냐는 그때 사항적인 문제라고 저는 봅니다. 그리고 지금 우크라이나 상황에 대해서 좀 토의하는 시간인데 우크라이나에 대해서 사실은 이번에 저는 윤석열 정부에 우려되는 지점이 하나는 있어요. 앞에 정책은 제가 잘 설명을 드렸는데 지금 국민의힘 당대표인 이준석 대표가 우크라이나 수도인 키예프에 가려는 것을 검토하고 있는 걸로 알고 있고 조만간에 윤석열 대통령이 나토 그 정상회담에 가는 것이 검토하고 있는 것 같아요. 이것은 사실 외교부 장관이 나토 정상회담에 간다든가 이런 것은 문제가 없지만은 대통령이 나토 정상회담에 참석하고 여당의 당 대표가 우크라이나 전쟁 지역에 간다는 것은 국익 차원에서 다시 생각해 볼 필요가 있습니다. 왜냐하면 이번에 6월에 하는 나토 정상회담의 주 논의는 우크라이나 전쟁에 대한 거와 러시아의 위협, 그다음 또 하나는 두 번째는 중국의 위협에 대해서 나토가 어떻게 대응할 것이냐에 대한 주 토의로 예상이 됩니다. 러시아와 중국에 대한 대응을 국제사회가 어떻게 대응할 것이냐, 그것은 군사적인 옵션까지 포함해서입니다. 거기에 이제 대통령이 참가한다면은 국제사회 국익 차원에서 다른 시그널을 줄 수가 있기 때문에 이것은 아주 신중히 검토를 해야 된다고 보고요. 여당 대표도 마찬가지입니다. 우크라이나 전쟁터에 가서 그 현황을 본다는 것은 그냥 개인이 가는 것이 아닙니다. 여당과 정부가 거기에 대해서 보고 있기 때문에 그런 것들은 국제사회나 또 러시아나 여러 그 우크라이나에 잘못된 시그널을 줄 수가 있죠. 먼저 우크라이나는 군사무기 지원을 간절히 원하고 있습니다. 그런데 여당 지도자가 간다면은 군사 지원까지 할 걸로 예상을 하고 요구할 때 사실 그것을 수락할 수가 없을 겁니다. 그렇게 되면은 신뢰 문제도 되는 것이고, 그래서 이 두 개의 문제는 지금 신정부가 들어서서 너무 조급하게 다루어서는 안 되고 외교적인 문제와 국제적인 문제에서는 국익을 여당 보수 진보를 따져서 안 되고 국익 차원에서 접근을 해야 된다라는 것을 제가 말씀드리고 싶습니다. 예.
Thank you very much. Now, I would love to continue this conversation, but I've been told to be strict, I'm afraid. We've run out of time. So thank you to all of our panelists. That was a very interesting conversation. Thank you very much. Thank you.